On today's show, the Locked On Cavs whip around is back. We talked to Gavin Shaw of Locked On Knicks about the Cavs matchup with New York, and then Matt George from Locked On Kings joins us to talk about the firing of old friend Mike Brown, where the Kings are going, and so much more on this edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube, before we get started here, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. A very fun episode today. Got to catch up with Gavin Schall about everything going on with the New York Knicks. And the Cavs have not seen the Knicks, obviously, since the end of February-ish. I believe it was February 21st, the last time they played. And in that game, of course, the Cavs won by, I think, 42 was the final margin of victory for them. It was one of the best games that they've had all season. And now they get to face the Knicks while New York is on the second night of a back-to-back. And the Cavs are coming off of their first stretch of back-to-back days off in 3 weeks at this point. So that is something to look forward to here. I think that is something the Cavs should look really good in this game. But this could maybe potentially be a playoff preview. Not expecting Jalen Brunson to play in this game for New York, but we cover all that, so much more with him. And then Matt George going to join the show coming up a little bit later from Locked On Kings. We talk about everything going on with Sacramento, the directionless nature of their franchise, and then just kind of where they're going, why they fired Mike Brown, and all of that. So before I get to Gavin, make sure you do me a favor. Subscribe everywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. If you're watching on YouTube, again, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me. Make sure you check out the Locked On Cavs daily newsletter. It is your one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. You can sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That is LockedOnDaily.com. Here's my talk with Gavin Shaw. For the third of 4 times this year, the Cavs will be taking on the New York Knicks. This game is taking place on Wednesday after the Cavs have 2 days off for the first time in a while. It'll be the second night of a back-to-back for New York. It doesn't sound like Jalen Brunson is going to be available, but to talk about all of it, we bring in Gavin Shaw of Locked On Knicks, and it has been a wild past few weeks for the Knicks. They've been staying afloat despite the fact that Jalen Brunson hasn't been available because of a ankle sprain that has cost him, the past several weeks. Gavin, how have the Knicks been able to keep their heads above water without Brunson on the floor lately?
It's a great question. Part of it is the schedule has not been terrible, but I also don't know if that's necessarily giving enough credit to OG Anunoby in particular, who's been incredible. Something like 23, 5, 2.5 since the Brunson injury. These last 5 games, though, he's been putting up like an efficient 30 points a game while playing, I would argue, some of the best defense in the NBA. Maybe this side of your guy, Evan Mobley, but he's been up there. He's been incredible on both ends. Mikal Bridges' last few games in particular has really stepped up after he was kind of hit or miss initially after the injury. And the one upside of losing Jalen Brunson beyond empowering all those other guys is your defense can get better. It didn't when they were starting campaign. It was pretty similar, but these last few games since campaign has been hurt. They've had DeLon Wright out there. They had a stretch with Deuce McBride out there, and that certainly helped them on that end of the floor, on top of getting Mitchell Robinson back and having him fully incorporated. I think now the 6th best defense in the NBA since the All-Star break, which coincided with Mitch returning.
So, and follow me on this one, because I think you'll understand where I'm going, but is it a bit of a blessing in disguise that Brunson has missed time, not because the Knicks are better without him? Like, that is a foolish thing to think. But as this is a team that does get ready for the postseason, is this kind of the thing where, okay, some of the other guys that you mentioned, like Bridges, like Anunoby, who have both been pretty good during the stretch, Is this something that can put those guys and ultimately the team in a better place than they were before Brunson got hurt when he gets back?
Yeah, this won't surprise you, but this is something we have discussed in depth on our podcast, and I would say yes, with the caveat that it is very much within Tom Thibodeau's hands. Like, of course, it's nice to see Mikal Bridges more confident. It's nice to see OG Anunoby empowered and more confident, but like Mikal just coming into this year was coming off a season and a half where he had a lot of success. Like OG Anunoby, of course, like both on the Knicks, like the first 18 games of this year, and in his time at Toronto had stretches, maybe not quite like this, but close to this. And I think it is on Tom Thibodeau to maintain this. The Knicks have been a lot more organized in their offense in terms of saying, like, all right, we are going to run an action here versus like having the luxury of saying, hey, Jalen Brunson, one of the 3 to 5 best isolation players on planet Earth, let my man cook. Which is great when you need it in like game 6 or 7 of a playoff series. I don't think it's a sustainable way to run crunch time NBA offense. And the whole point of getting Mikal Bridges, of getting a Karl Anthony Towns was supposed to be that Jalen Brunson did not have to do all that on a game-to-game basis. Instead, he's had the ball in his hands when he's on the court more than any other player in the NBA, nearly 9 minutes a game on the basketball. So I still think it's on Tom Thibodeau to emphasize those guys when Brunson comes back. But it's good to have proof of concept that, hey, Mikal Bridges didn't just forget how to play, right? He needed some actions called for him, and he's been more aggressive in turn. Same thing with OG Anunoby. Push comes to shove, he's more willing to go attack the basket. Again, I'll caveat all that with they haven't been playing the best defenses lately.
Right, and that certainly matters as far as this conversation goes. But when do you expect Jalen Brunson to be back on the floor? We know that he was cleared for a return to quote unquote basketball activities, whatever you want to call that, on Sunday before the Knicks took on the Blazers. But when do you think that he suits up for the Knicks again?
Yeah, Knicks are typically, maybe I'm reading too much into Mitchell Robinson, who's kind of a special case with his injury history, but they've been typically pretty conservative in their injury ramp up, and I can't imagine any reason why they would basically wait for Brunson to get to 100% and then say, all right, let's give it another 4 days after that, right? The only thing that ultimately matters is that, I mean, not the only thing, but the most important thing is that he is just 100% healthy going into game 1 of the playoffs. That being said, I would look to, I would say the earliest would be this Sunday against the Suns. I really don't see a world where maybe we're all shocked that he plays against Cleveland and they have a back-to-back Saturday and Sunday. I think it would make a lot of sense to bring him back Sunday against the Suns, if not Tuesday, April 8th against the Boston Celtics. If there was a gun to my head and there was a proverbial gun to the Knicks head and they had a playoff game today, I expect he would play in some form or fashion. But I think they're wisely being very conservative in their approach.
So for the playoffs, the Knicks are currently in the number 3 spot in the Eastern Conference. They have a 4-game lead as we record this over the Indiana Pacers, and they cannot surpass the Boston Celtics, I don't believe, with the amount of games left. Like, they are pretty locked in to that number 3 spot. And there are a number of different teams that they could end up playing in the first round in that 3-6 matchup between, I guess, if the Pacers fell apart in the last couple of weeks, they'd be possible. The Milwaukee Bucks are certainly possible, and the Detroit Pistons are certainly possible. Is there one of those teams, Gavin, that you look at and say, you know what, that would probably be the best matchup for the Knicks? And then conversely, which one do you think would also be the worst matchup of those 3 for the Knicks?
So we did an episode on this about 10 days ago, and my answer at that time was the Bucks were the one I was the most scared of. I'm kind of middling scared of the Pistons because I think they've been the best team in the group, but also have obviously far and away the least playoff experience. And then I was somehow least scared of the Pacers, which didn't sit well because I still wake up in a cold sweat, dreaming of Pascal Siakam just hitting mid-range jumper after mid-range jumper on my beloved Knicks. But I've revised that a little in the last 10 days. I'm going to say the Pistons are still probably the team I would least want to, or excuse me, not still, are now the team I would least want to play. I believe the stat I heard on the Bill Simmons podcast today was they are 4th in net rating over the last 50 games. I haven't verified that, but if so, that's ridiculous. I know they are up there over that extended stretch. Like they've just like basically since a somewhat middling start to the year, which included them beating the Knicks twice in 3 games, like they have just flat out been one of the best teams in basketball. And I'm kind of struggling to balance that notion with the idea that, again, like unless you want to count Tobias Harris scoring like 2 points a game in every game 7 that Philly played, and they don't really have any meaningful playoff experience on that team. And yet I kind of think outside of Giannis, like Cade is pretty clearly, and maybe there's some Tyrese Halliburton disrespect and some Siakam disrespect. I would say Cade is pretty clearly the second scariest individual player in that group. Indiana's just really good. We all know the stat that they're one of 3 teams in the Eastern Conference with an above 500 record against teams over 500. And obviously last year they matched up well with the Knicks. This year the Knicks have beat them 2 out of 3 times. One of those games was without Miles Turner. I'd be fascinated to see how it plays out. I do think Indiana is certainly capable of beating the Knicks. I just think healthy, the Knicks are a similar team, and I just think slightly more talented. And Milwaukee, my logic for them being the scariest originally was just that Giannis is the clear-cut best player on the court, which I don't think would be true in those other series. But man, the Knicks, after years of being terrified by the Bucks, seriously, I think under Tibbs they lost like 10 straight games to Milwaukee. They just have the Bucks number this year, even without Jalen Brunson. Like Milwaukee has absolutely no one on that team that has a chance in the world of slowing down Jalen, and the Knicks have figured out how to hunt Brook Lopez defensively, attack him and drop. There's nowhere for Damian Lillard to hide defensively. Could Milwaukee win 2 games just because Dame and Giannis are amazing? Sure, definitely plausible, but I think the Knicks, that is just a really, really good matchup for them. So I'm going to say Milwaukee's the easiest.
Right, and even to that point, we don't know if Damian Lillard's going to be available when the postseason arrives with the blood clot situation that he's dealing with, and beyond that, like that Bucks team right now looks broken. I think that they're the team that everybody should sort of, and this is crazy to say considering that I think they have the best player in the Eastern Conference in Giannis, but I think they're the team that everybody in the first round should want to play in that group. Now, let's say hypothetically here that the Knicks get out of the first round, that they beat whoever they draw with the 6th seed, which would be the likely outcome. They will be favorites in whatever series they get. They're going to then match up with the Boston Celtics, and the Boston Celtics have really, really dominated the New York Knicks. I think it's probably fair to say this year. Do you see pathways for New York to beat Boston 4 times in a 7-game series in the middle of May?
That pathway, I think, is a lot of turned ankles for the Boston Celtics. I think outside of that, not so much. Maybe I think on top of those games, I live in Phoenix, and I covered Celtics Suns this past week, and I watched the Celtics without Jason Tatum hit 7 threes in the first 4 minutes of that game and win by 30 in a game they probably could have won by 50, and now Phoenix is free falling. They are not the New York Knicks. I am really encouraged about OG Anunoby because I think getting the best possible version of him, and a version of him that borderline could, like, I'm going to throw out borderline. He would have to outplay Jalen Brown in a series, I think, for the Knicks to win, which I actually think is something that is plausible. You would need something close to this version of Mikal Bridges, who really has not, unless I'm misremembering, shown up in those 3 Boston games. And I just, this sort of goes back to your earlier question about, like, all right, will these guys showing more translate to having Jalen Brunson back? I don't know if there is a perfect version of this team where everyone is firing on all cylinders. We saw that kind of once all season when they played the Thunder, and it lasted for 3 quarters, and the Knicks still ultimately lost that game. If that version of the Knicks is just somewhere in there, could they be competitive with Boston? Could that be like a fun series where the Knicks show a lot of fight? Like, yeah, I think that's plausible. But right now, honestly, if you told me Boston didn't have Jason Tatum coming into that series, I would say it was a coin flip. And I might even lean towards favoring Boston still. So I would say the Celtics are heavy, heavy, heavy favorites in that series. And it would take just a lot of different things going right for the Knicks to pull off an upset there.
Given all of that being true, and I agree with you with the vast majority of it, what do you think needs to happen for this season to be considered a success for New York? Like, is regular season success that they have had before and are obviously having this year enough? Or is it, hey, this team that added Karl Anthony Towns, that added Bridges, that changed over the roster and is a more talented team than what previous versions of the Knicks have been, still didn't make a conference finals? Is that something, can you view that as a success, or is this season going to be a failure if they don't beat Boston?
I think it's hard because in my mind, it's already a failure in the sense that I don't think the process has been very good this year. And I might be too quick to go to this, but for a long time, we've seen Tom Thibodeau very, very rigid in terms of what lineups he considers playable and what lineups he considers startable. And I think I threw this stat out last time I was on this podcast, but the Knicks, and maybe it's changed since the Brunson injury, I'm not sure, but as of the time of the Brunson injury, 6 most successful lineups had Deuce McBride in it, and there's been a refusal to start him. There's been a refusal to consider bringing Josh Hart off the bench, even though we've seen the best teams in the NBA, including Cleveland, just not guard Josh Hart and find ways to compete with the Knicks. Or like worse teams have found ways to compete with the Knicks because of it. Better teams have found ways to dominate the Knicks because of it. I personally, you get Karl Anthony Towns. Let's see what 5 out actually looks like. And the version of Josh Hart this year, who's scared to shoot threes, that is not 5 out. So I think that is just one example, but the lack of experimentation, the lack for long stretches of offensive creativity that again has gotten a lot better since Brunson got hurt. I think the process has been kind of flawed from day one with this group. Could that shift in the right direction of playoffs? Yeah. As far as a results perspective, if the Knicks took Boston to 7 in a competitive series, it would be hard for you to tell me the season's a failure when I think Boston is just flat out one of the greatest starting lineups, one of the greatest rosters assembled in the history of the NBA. Like I would maybe not call that a quote unquote success, but I would walk out of this season feeling like content, borderline happy with how the Knicks did. Like that would tell you this is a team that can win a championship. And that's ultimately what it comes down to. Do you leave the playoffs thinking this core that you sold all your picks for has a championship ceiling? Because right now, I don't think that. I don't think a lot of people who cover this team think that. So the Knicks are going to have to prove me wrong. They're going to have to prove a lot of people wrong for this year to be considered a success.
I think that is a very fair way to look at it. And the Cavs will see the Knicks at least 2 more times this year. Hey, maybe all those ankles will be turned and we'll see each other in the conference finals. But Gavin, thanks so much for doing this. Maybe we will connect again next week before the final regular season matchup between these 2 teams, man.
Sounds good, Danny. A lot of fun.
Today's show brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like watching basketball live and in person. The energy of the crowd, the sound of the sneakers on the hardwood, maybe even a celebrity sighting courtside if you're lucky enough. And if you want to catch a game in person, Game Time makes getting tickets easier than ever. Plus, their new feature, Game Time Picks, filters out all the fluff and shows you only the best deals on great seats. So you don't have to waste time scrolling through thousands and thousands of tickets. There are amazing tickets every day for just about everything you can think of. This isn't something that, I can only get basketball tickets. No, you can get tickets to comedy shows. If you want to go to a baseball game, whatever you want to do, Game Time is going to be able to help get you in the door. And you need to make sure that you're taking the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA. That is LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off that first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off that first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. For the second time this season, the Cavs will take on the Sacramento Kings on Sunday. And for the first time this season, we're going to talk to Matt George of the Locked On Kings podcast. Matt, you said earlier, after the Kings fired Mike Brown this season, welcome to basketball hell. Well, what's basketball hell like these days over in Sacramento?
Well, it's familiar. Unfortunately, it's not somewhere that I was hoping the Sacramento Kings would return to for quite some time after taking 16 years to work their way out of it. But hey, at least we had one fun season because here we go back into familiar doom and gloom territory. Things aren't it's funny. Things aren't too hot here in Sacramento. Pun intended, I guess, with the basketball hell. But it's not horrendous yet. It's just not good. It's just not good right now.
So how do they go from, and I know you posted this on Locked On Kings the other day, but how do they go from a team that was, clinched their first playoff berth, and I think it was a 16-year drought a couple of years ago. Last year took a bit of a step back. This year, things certainly have not gone as planned. Like, how did we get from where they were 2 years ago, where they probably should have won that series against the Warriors in the postseason, to today?
Oof. Well, they failed. First and foremost, they failed to build upon what they did well, and they failed to address some blatant and obvious roster needs, especially when it comes to a lack of length, size, and athleticism, particularly on the wing and the forward positions. So that's where it started, and then that kind of spiraled into the return to chaos and instability that has just plagued this organization for so long, willingly firing the only successful head coach that they've had in almost 2 decades since Rick Adelman. Now, Michael Malone is also in there, and he's kind of a wild card because he was having success and the Sacramento Kings fired him for no reason. So it's not like we can use that as an argument for Sacramento. But Mike Brown figured some things out and managed to help coach this team to relevancy again. Now, he did have a front office that I felt did a lot of really, really good things, took some necessary risks to get themselves to a point that they hadn't been in again 16 years. But they just have failed completely to build upon that. They are now down a head coach, down their star in De'Aaron Fox, who they essentially pushed out the door the second that they fired Mike, and made the wrong moves at the wrong time and put themselves in a position to where not only are they not a good basketball team, they're directionless. Like we don't know where they're going. I don't know if they know where they're going. And now you're just trying to finish your final 8 games of this season, limp into the play-in, maybe possibly kind of make the playoffs if you want to consider that a success. But everybody knows the Sacramento Kings have no chance of doing anything of substance in the playoffs anyway. So again, where are you going? We don't know with the Sacramento Kings right now.
So where did things go wrong with Mike Brown this year? Because from the outside, and yes, as we mentioned already, they didn't have the year they expected to last year, but from the outside, of course, here in Cleveland, we know a lot of what Mike Brown is about, and he was, I think, a very different and a coach that had progressed in his career by the time he got to Sacramento, as opposed to either of his stints in Cleveland in charge of the Cavaliers. But where did things go wrong that caused this to get to the point where he was fired in the middle of the season, or I guess early in the season?
Well, I'll say nobody is blameless in this entire saga. Mike certainly made some mistakes. Mike, like one of his biggest mistakes was how he handled or really mishandled Keon Ellis here in Sacramento, and it became pretty clear, and more information came out, and whispers and things of that nature over the last handful of months that there was a section of the Kings roster, Kings locker room, that was not a fan of his, did not like him. Now, I am pretty firmly in the corner of Mike Brown, one, because of Sacramento's woeful history when it comes to head coaches, two, because I was able to build a relationship with Mike over the years that he was here, and he taught me a lot and spent time to really explain things. He went above and beyond, and it's not like he bought my loyalty or bought my appreciation by being nice to me or anything like that. Like, he'd take the opportunity to teach. He'd also take the opportunity to hold you accountable as a media member. He did that with me. He did that with multiple media members. He did that with everybody. He took accountability upon himself, but he was a person that stepped into the room or stepped in the door on day one as an introductory press conference, started talking about every organization has a soul, and talked about how the organization, all facets of the organization need to be on the same page. And what I think got him fired is that Mike Brown tried to hold people accountable that did not want to be held accountable or thought that they were above that. And I think there are some players on this Sacramento Kings roster that did not like Mike Brown and did not like his coaching style because he pushed him. He practiced too much. All these things that ultimately Mike was trying to make the Kings a better basketball team. And the reality is he got results. Things were trending in the wrong direction this season. You could question, like, it's fair to say that Mike lost a good portion, if not the entire locker room in Sacramento. And normally that's the kiss of death for a coach. But what I don't like about that kiss of death, or that saying, losing the locker room, is it puts all the onus and all the responsibility on the coach. What about the players that chose to quit on them? What about the players who decided that they weren't going to give their all for that coach anymore? The Sacramento Kings picked those players over Mike, picked those players over De'Aaron Fox. And some of those players are still here, and they're not performing now for Doug Christie, who's a coach that they love and respect and admire. And the Kings are going to ultimately end up in a position, fewer wins than last season, and just a position of disappointment and overall organizational confusion. So it's a very long-winded way of kind of answering the question, but Mike challenged people that I guess didn't want to be challenged. He made some mistakes of his own along the way, and he took the fall for the front office failing to address and provide the things that he, De'Aaron Fox, and others have been asking for with this roster, which is just some depth at the forward position. Some guys that are 6'7", 6'8", 6'9", that can defend the perimeter, that can be two-way players. I know every team wants those guys, but Sacramento had basically none of them, or very few of them. It was Keegan Murray, and that was it. And the Kings struggled because they had the same weaknesses. The front office didn't address them, and Mike Brown took the fall.
As you mentioned, that was probably the nail in the coffin for De'Aaron Fox wanting out of Sacramento. Obviously, now he is in San Antonio. How do you think the Kings did in that trade?
Terrible. Actually, time will tell. My initial reaction is it was not a good move, and the Sacramento Kings put themselves into a corner, and now they can't cry wolf that, oh, we had no leverage. The situation was like we couldn't get more because De'Aaron Fox and Rich Paul put us in this position. No, you put yourselves in that position, and they just used what power they had to get the result that they wanted. Like, people want to blame Fox for that. People want to blame Rich Paul for that, and that's fine. I get it. They leveraged the situation to make it happen, but the Kings allowed for things to get that far. Look, the draft picks are the only thing you're holding out hope for, and you didn't get great ones. Like, you're hoping the San Antonio Spurs pick in a couple of years. It's unprotected is good, but we expect the Spurs to be really good in a couple of years, do we not? With Victor Wembanyama and De'Aaron Fox, the Minnesota
Absolutely.
Timberwolves first round pick, and I think 2031. That's a total wild card. Maybe that's good. Maybe it's not. We don't know. You didn't get anything surefire. You got a bunch of maybes, and you got Zach LaVine, who has one of the worst contracts in the NBA. Now, I like Zach. I think Zach is a bona fide bucket. When he's on, boy, oh boy, is he fun to watch. And he had a stretch after the trade where he was shooting over 60% from 3-point range on a high volume for over a week, right? And it's fun to watch. It's really exciting, and I'm very intrigued to see, because I believe Zach LaVine's going to be around for the next 2 years because nobody wants that contract. I'm interested to see what LaVine looks like in a world where DeRozan's not here in Sacramento. I believe DeRozan is gone this offseason. So I'm intrigued. But Zach LaVine is a name that Kings owner Vivek Ranadive has been infatuated with for a while. And if you look through the history of Ranadive's ownership, you see patterns. You see patterns with the hiring and firing of coaches. You see patterns with certain players that Vivek likes ending up on the roster, from the drafting of Nick Stauskas to the trade of DeMarcus Cousins to bring Buddy Hield to Sacramento. And now Zach LaVine is a Sacramento King. It's the continuation of a pattern. And ultimately, the Kings have only been a playoff team for 1 year during his ownership tenure, and have really only been irrelevant for 2.5 years. Let's say that. So maybe it's not the best pattern to follow.
Right. And I don't know that relevant would necessarily describe where the Kings are at right now, maybe at the edge of the play-in. Do you think that they'd be better off just missing the postseason altogether, or is getting into the play-in and potentially getting their teeth kicked in the first round something that could be looked at as, okay, we at least did this?
So it's a harder question to answer than it should be, not because I'm fence sitting, but because, again, we don't know the direction of the organization. If it were me, like, if the Kings lose their draft pick this summer, if it falls out of the top 12, it's a top 12 protected pick that goes to Atlanta as part of the Kevin Huerter trade. The Kings traded Kevin Huerter to the Chicago Bulls as part of the De'Aaron Fox deal. So they're still dealing with draft compensation to Atlanta in a trade for a player that is no longer on this roster. Like, just another example of the Kings kind of getting in their own way. I'm of the belief that you fired your head coach, you got rid of your star player, just finish the reset, bring in a new front office. Like, I admire and appreciate Monty McNair for the moves that he was able to make. Trading Tyrese Halliburton to bring Domantas Sabonis in here. It's an unpopular move, and a lot of people are going to blame him for it. I think it's a move that needed to happen. I think it's overall still a good move. I'm a believer and a fan of Domantas Sabonis. McNair has made a lot of good moves, but he's failed to. You got the Kings back to relevancy, but you failed to build upon it. And in fact, you really fumbled everything good that you built for yourself 2 years ago. The last 2 years have just been a fumble job, and now you're punting on what the Beam team originally was. So, to me, I'm of the belief that you do a full-on reset, bring in a new front office. Now, that doesn't mean a full-on blow-it-up rebuild, because I think the Kings actively want to avoid that. But I think a lot of changes have to be made this offseason, and it's a lot easier to make changes when you have an actual draft pick than it is to not have that draft pick and look to acquire talent elsewhere, which is already difficult enough to do in Sacramento that's never been a free agency destination. So
Do you
in my
go
opinion,
on?
yes, I would. I'm not rooting for the Kings to miss the play-in, but if missing the play-in and missing the playoffs means keeping their draft pick, I think that's the better, safer, I guess, route to go in. But none of them feel good at this point.
Do you anticipate front office changes? And I guess the second part of this question is, does it matter as long as ownership is what ownership is in Sacramento? Like, is that ultimately a thing? And I know, in professional sports, you can't fire the owner. Like, that is not the thing that you can change to make your organization better. But ultimately, it seems like that's the root of all of this.
Yeah, talking about ownership is like waving your fist at a greater power. Like there's just nothing you can do about it, right?
Mhm.
And like I've had interactions with Vivek Ranadive. He has, I think, the greatest of intentions, but the execution just has not been there. And like I talked about earlier, the same patterns of kind of ineptitude keep happening. Um, Ownership definitely plays a major factor, but there's only so much you can do about it. What you can do is empower basketball decision makers to make basketball decisions. And those who are in those decisions, when the basketball decision making doesn't live up to par or expectation, you then change the decision makers. Like that's the regardless of what happens with ownership, that's the realistic next step to me. Um, Not that I'm rooting for anybody to lose their job or anything like that, because there's a human element to this too. But this is a results oriented league, and the Sacramento Kings are straight up not getting results. So I'm of the belief that you bring in a new basketball decision maker, and whoever that is, they have assurances built into their contract or whatever agreement they come to, that they're given the proper time and the freedom to fix this mess that you've made for yourself, because this is not going to be a quick fix. There is no quick fix for the Sacramento Kings at this point. You're not probably going to start from scratch, but there is some sort of reset button that needs to be hit.
Well, if you want to learn more about the Sacramento Kings before the Cavs take them on Sunday, go check out Matt on Locked on Kings. He's one of the best there is at this. Matt, keep up the great work and best of luck in basketball hell, man.
Well, come on by anytime. At least the A's are here now.
Thank you again for making Locked on Cavs your first listen today and every day, or in this case, maybe your second listen. If you want more thoughts on the Cavs beating the Clippers on Monday, go check out the first episode that was posted today in this feed. Make sure you download it wherever you get your podcast. Download it everywhere you get your podcast. I don't care if you listen on Apple. Download it on Spotify too. All right. Help out the show. Help grow the show. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked on Cavs. And if you're watching on YouTube, before we get out of here, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked on Cavs content. I'll be back tomorrow talking more about the Cleveland Cavaliers.